next 2 weeks and the decisions that come down.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Tom Taylor, for being with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
We now go to the floor of the House of Representatives. Among the issues they'll be taking up today include the late-term abortion bill sponsored by Representative Trent Franks. That's the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. We'll see them meet for morning hour here at 10 o'clock and then at noon for legislative duties. Have a good day.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., June 18, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable Ted Poe to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 3, 2013, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party being limited to 1 hour, each member other than the majority or minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Bera, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to talk about core American values, values of liberty, values of freedom, values of individual rights. Mr. Speaker, today a bill is going to come before this body that is a blatant attempt to take away those individual rights, those individual freedoms, freedoms that are core to who we are. This bill aims to take away individual decisions from America's mothers, America's sisters, and America's daughters. This bill is a travesty and a slap in the face of those core values of individual liberty and individual freedom. And this bill criminalizes doctors for doing our jobs. Now, I'm a doctor. Core to the oath that I took was to sit with my patients, answer their questions, and empower them to make the decisions that best fit their faith circumstances, their individual circumstances, their family circumstances. That's core to the oath every doctor in the United States of America has taken. That's core to my job. Now, the bill that's coming to the floor today takes those values and they slap them in the face. They put the government right in the middle of my exam room. And the government has no place in between the doctor and the patient. What we should be debating is how we empower our patients, how we promote women's health, how we try to keep women healthy and help them plan their pregnancies, how we empower families. As a husband and the father of a daughter, keeping women healthy is extremely important to me, and helping empower parents and families to plan those pregnancies is not only smart, but it's good medicine. Legislation I'm introducing later this week, the Women's Preventive Health Awareness Campaign, will direct the Department of Health and Human Services to educate women about the importance of the preventive wellness exam. This is a piece of legislation that will help address the issue of planning families, of planning when you want to be pregnant. It'll help address the issues of undiagnosed heart disease. It'll help us diagnose cancer, and it'll save thousands of lives. I would urge my colleagues in this body and my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join us in this bill. It's not only smart medicine, it'll get to the core of empowering patients, empowering women, and empowering families to make the decisions that best fit within the context of their lives. That's the oath that I took as a doctor. That's the promise that I make to all my patients. And that's the oath that we take in this body to protect those individual freedoms and those individual rights of all Americans and of all America's women. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Indiana, Ms. Walorski, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to address the importance of protecting life. While I'm home in Indiana spending time in our communities, the importance of strong values and Hoosier common sense continues to rule the foundations of our families. I believe it's critical for Congress to act today to protect human life and treat women and the unborn children with the protection they deserve from the dangers of late-term abortions. We're talking about the next generation of moms and grandmothers, of aunts and sisters and our loved ones. There is not a price that can be put on the value of an innocent human life. I've been a strong supporter of life and for defending the unborn, and feel that it's our responsibility to protect the most vulnerable who cannot protect themselves. I urge my colleagues to join me in support of H.R. 1797 for the sake of protecting the unborn from late-term abortions. And, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Gutierrez, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, later today the Judiciary Committee will mark up the first immigration reform bill offered by the Republicans in the 113th Congress. Since Election Day, no member of Congress has done more to highlight and praise Republicans for their new spirit of bipartisanship on immigration than I. I praised our committee and subcommittee chairmen for their new tone in the Republican-led immigration hearings. When the Republican Party chairman said Republicans had to stop pushing Latino voters away, I said, right on, Rance. When young Republicans warned the GOP to change its tune to remain viable, I said, I think you're right. When your former candidate for vice president and budget committee chairman came to Chicago to talk about immigration reform, I brought him to the barrio so that the Latino community could see him and applaud his commitment to immigration reform. Judge Carter, the gentleman from Texas, and I shared the stage in San Antonio to discuss immigration reform deep in the heart of Texas, where we agreed on more things than we disagreed. He and I have met almost every day since January with a small bipartisan group of colleagues to fashion a bill that both parties can embrace. And it's hard work for both parties. On the other side of the aisle, it's hard to talk about immigrants in a new way when your party, its platform, its candidates, its talk radio and its TV personalities have spoken disparagingly about immigrants for years. When you reference gangbangers and drunk drivers and rapists every time you talk about immigrants, it is hard to switch gears quickly. But most Republicans in this body, up until last week, were singing from a new and more harmonious hymnal. Bipartisan work on immigration reform has been difficult on my side of the aisle, too. I've always fought for universal health care coverage, but discussing health care coverage for undocumented immigrants and their families, even in the context of a legalization program where they pay their full taxes, submit fingerprints, and pay huge fines, is a non-starter not only for Republicans but Democrats, unfortunately, alike. I've advocated for the LGBT rights from my days as a Chicago alderman, but to work in a bipartisan manner, it's off the table. To keep discussions with Republicans going, I am told the diversity visa program that brings in immigrants from Africa and Ireland and around the world who diversify our immigrant pool, that program is eliminated, no discussion, in the name of bipartisanship. Siblings, brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens will no longer be able to come to America sponsored by their family members. And the fees and fines we charge, billions upon billions on immigrants so that they can be here legally, that will fund more drones, fences, border guards, and more enforcement on a border that is as secure as I've seen in American history. But we'll do it. I ask my Republican colleagues, when is it enough? But I want to keep things moving forward. So I hold my tongue, work within the bipartisan process, and stay with the group. I speak well of Republicans who have partnered with Democrats on a serious bipartisan bill this year. A tough but fair bipartisan bill is moving toward passage, and our tough but fair bipartisan House bill is nearly complete. We're putting aside partisan bickering to solve a difficult policy issue for the American people. In this moment, just in time for the 4th of July, we get red meat politics for the barbecue and partisan fireworks on immigration. The Arizona SB 1070 law was substantially struck down by the Supreme Court. No matter. Now, your side of the aisle wants to nationalize it. Sheriff Joe Arpaio is slapped by the federal courts for systematically denying the civil rights of U.S. citizens and legal immigrants. No matter. Let's canonize him. Police and local government want immigrants in their communities to be able to call the police if they're a victim of crime or are witnesses to crime. Too bad. Republicans in Washington know better than your cops, prosecutors, and mayors at home. They will cut your federal funding unless you commit to a full frontal deportation and local immigration enforcement. When 500,000 Latino citizens turn 18 every year and become potential voters, Republicans seem hell-bent on lining up and jumping off the demographic cliff. While our country demands solutions and leaderships, Republicans are feeding the partisan monster red meat as if their calendars already read 2014. As a Democrat, I should probably stand back and watch. If you want to hang yourself on the immigration issue, who am I to stop you? But as an American, I have to tell you what I really feel. Your country needs you to step away from the partisan red meat and fear-mongering that has defined your party on immigration. Come back to your senses. Do not push forward a bill that criminalizes every immigrant family and makes everyone think twice before they call 911. You are better than this. America needs you to be.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California for 5 minutes, Mr. McClintock.
Mr. Speaker, in the early 1760s, the royal governor of Massachusetts began issuing writs of assistance as general warrants to search for contraband. They empowered officials to search indiscriminately for evidence of smuggling. These warrants were challenged in February 1761 by James Otis, who argued forcefully that they violated the natural rights of Englishmen and were, in fact, quote, instruments of slavery. A 25-year-old attorney who attended the trial later wrote, "Every man of a crowded audience appeared to me to go away as I did, ready to take arms against writs of assistance. Then and there, the child independence was born." That young lawyer was John Adams. To him, that's the moment the American Revolution began. The general warrants were the first warning that his king had become a tyrant. The founders specifically wrote the Fourth Amendment to assure that indiscriminate government searches never happened again in America. In America, in order for the government to invade your privacy or to go through your personal records or effects, it must first present some evidence that justifies its suspicion against you, and then specify what records or things it's searching for. Last week, we learned the federal government is today returning to those general warrants on a scale unimaginable in colonial times by seizing the phone and internet records of virtually every American. We're told that this is perfectly permissible under past Supreme Court rulings because the government is not monitoring content, but only the records that are held by a third party. But if phone records are outside the protection of the Fourth Amendment because they're held by a third party, then so too are all of our records or effects held by third parties. That means the property you keep in storage or with a family member, the private medical records held by your physician, the backup files on your computer maintained on another server, all are subject to indiscriminate search. In fact, many of the general warrants served long ago in Boston were on warehouses owned by third parties. Now, even if we were to accept this rationale, then that third party, for example, the phone company, ought itself to be safe from general warrants like those that have apparently scooped up the phone and internet records of every American. It's argued with Orwellian logic that it's permissible to seize these records indiscriminately since they aren't actually searched until a legal warrant is issued by a secret FISA court. But if general warrants can produce the evidence for specific warrants, well, isn't the Fourth Amendment prohibition against general warrants then rendered meaningless? And all we know of the secret FISA court and its deliberations is that out of 34,000 warrants requested by the government, it has rejected only 11, hardly a testament to judicial prudence or independence. We're told that the information will be used only to search for terrorists. Does anyone actually believe that? Just a few months ago, the Director of National Intelligence brazenly lied to the Congress when he denied the program existed at all. Just a few weeks ago, we learned that this administration has taken confidential tax information belonging to its political opponents and leaked it to its political supporters. Is there anyone so naive as to believe the same thing won't be done with phone and internet records if it suits the designs of powerful officials? A free society does not depend on a police state that tracks the behavior of every citizen for its security. A free society depends instead on principles of law that protect liberty while meting out stern punishment to those who abuse it. It doesn't mean we catch every criminal or terrorist. It means that those we do catch are brought to justice as a warning to others. This is true whether we are enforcing the laws of our nation or the law of nations. Indeed, if we had responded to the attack on September 11th with the same seriousness as we responded to Pearl Harbor, terrorism would not be the threat that it is today. Ours is not the first civilization to be seduced by the siren song of a benevolent, all-powerful government. But without a single exception, every civilization that has succumbed to this lie has awakened one morning to find that the benevolence is gone and the all-powerful government is still there. Mr. Speaker, this is our generation's wake-up call, and we ignore it at extreme peril to our liberty. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes Mr. Cardenas, the gentleman from California, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with great pride today that I rise to recognize the great achievements of 3 high schools in my district, District Number 29 from California. I want to begin by congratulating Arleta High School for achieving a 92% graduation rate and setting the gold standard for the Los Angeles Unified School District. Opening in 2006, this school achieved this enormous feat in just 7 years. The Arleta Mustangs have the highest graduation rate of any traditional high school in all of LA Unified School District. This is a testament to all the hard work and support this community has invested in its children and their future. I would also like to recognize departing principal Dr. Linda Calvo for her unrelenting vision. She will be dearly missed, and I hope that her successor will continue the tremendous strides made on this campus and in the surrounding neighborhoods. I also like to recognize the LA Unified School Board member, Nuri Martinez, who actually went to one of the high schools that I'm going to recognize in just a minute. She's been a strong and tireless advocate for this community as the school board member for the last 4 years. I commend the teachers for their commitment and dedication to their students, the parents for their love, support, and involvement in their children's lives, and the students who have risen to the challenge and proved it is possible to reach your dreams. Bragging rights are not limited to just Arleta High School. Located less than 4 miles away, the Sun Valley High School Wildcats can also be proud. I'd like to congratulate and commend the Sun Valley High School robotics team for being named the national champions of the 2013 Mini Urban Challenge competition. Sponsored by the United States Air Force Research Laboratory, this challenge requires high school students to design and operate a robotic car to autonomously navigate a model city. On June 1st, the Sun Valley Robotics team competed against 9 regional champions in Washington, D.C., and became the national champions. I want to recognize also Principal Paul de Rosario for his leadership and continuous support of the team, Mr. Hicks and Ms. Yamagata for guiding and assisting the team through the project and to the victory, the volunteers who invested on their own time and money to help the team as well, and the students for their perseverance and creativity. The success of California's 29th District High Schools doesn't end there, and it doesn't end just in the classroom. I'd also like to congratulate San Fernando High School's baseball team on winning their 2nd city championship in 3 years. On June 1st, San Fernando defeated Cleveland High School 2-1 in Dodger Stadium to claim their championship for a 2nd year in a row. Under the leadership of Coach Armando Gomez, the Tigers have done a phenomenal job of playing as a team and putting in the extra work to build a successful program at San Fernando High School. All of these students are a great source of pride to our community and prove that hard work, sacrifice, and commitment pay off. They are the future of our country and also of the San Fernando Valley. I think it's important for us to understand that today I stand not only to congratulate the young people, but to congratulate all of the adults that surround them who have given themselves and gone the extra mile to make sure that we bring out the best in our children. I'd also like to take a point of personal privilege to welcome our little ambassador who's here to talk to me and other members about children's hospitals. You might know him as Little Vader, as he was in a commercial during the Super Bowl game, and he's with me today again as a young ambassador showing leadership at his young age. And I think it's important for us to recognize at moments like this that our young people, our young Americans, are teenagers, or maybe they're little kids, but you too can be a leader at any age. You don't have to wait till you're a little older like us. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at a time when bipartisanship is rare in Washington, this past week, a bipartisan majority of members of the United States House of Representatives together called upon the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, to delay further implementation of the competitive bidding program for the durable medical equipment, prosthetics, orthotics, and supplies. A growing number of flaws have been identified in the bidding program, which is being used to procure these goods and services for those facing life-changing disease and disability. We do not oppose competitive bidding. In fact, we want to ensure that true competition takes place, and Medicare plays by the rules that they set for the program. Today, I stand beside 226 of my colleagues here in the People's House and urge the administrator of CMS to do the right thing and use her authority under the current law to delay implementation in order to fix these abuses before moving forward in 100 areas nationwide on July 1st. Mr. Speaker, Administrator Tavenner has to know the clock is ticking, and if unchecked, the failure of this program will be on her watch. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to pay tribute to a man and a friend of mine who spent most of his adult life being actively engaged in the processes of social advocacy and public policy decision-making, and who ultimately became the mayor of Gary, Indiana, and a national progressive political leader. Rudy Clay was born in Alabama, and after the death of his mother was brought to Gary, Indiana, where he was raised by his two aunts, Miss Lucy Hunter and Miss Daisy Washington, who started him to attend in church, which he did for the rest of his life. He graduated from the Gary Roosevelt High School and attended the University of Indiana at Bloomington, married his wife, Miss Christine Swan, was drafted into the Army, served his time, was honorably discharged, went into the insurance business, worked for Prudential and State Farm insurance companies, and ultimately opened his own company, the Rudolph Clay Insurance Agency, of which he was greatly proud. Rudy, like many people of his era, became actively involved in the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s, which led him to electoral politics. He was elected to practically everything that one could possibly be elected to in Lake County, Indiana, from precinct committeeman to mayor of Gary. In 1971, Rudy was elected to become the first African-American state senator in the state of Indiana. In the Senate, he was the deciding vote that made it possible for an African-American to be elected a Lake County commissioner. He was the first African-American to be elected county recorder in the state of Indiana. He was county chairman of the Lake County Democratic Party. He served as a Lake County commissioner. He was the chairman of the Gary Precinct Committeemen's Organization and mayor of his beloved city and played a key role in the Obama victory in Indiana in 2008. Rudy was a great family man, loved by his neighbors and friends, loved by the members of his church and all of those with whom he came into contact, loved by his associates in the lodge, and the average person in Gary, Indiana, and any place around it, knew Rudy Clay and loved him for his great work. I convey condolences to his wife, Mrs. Christine Clay, his son, Rudy Jr., his brothers and sisters, and other members of his family. When one sums up his presence on earth, they can simply say of Rudy, a job well done, a life well lived. We salute you, Mayor Rudolph Rudy Clay. I thank you for being my friend. May your soul rest in peace. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, every day throughout the United States, criminals commit crimes against good people. Some of those cases make the news. The news usually spends a lot of time talking about the defendant. There's a trial, justice occurs, and the world moves on. But many times, unfortunately, in our culture, there is a victim in that crime. And the victim after the trial is just ignored in some cases. Some of those victims are sexual assault victims. Back in the day when I spent 30 years at the courthouse in Houston as a prosecutor and a judge, I saw a lot of them. In fact, I keep up with some of them today. And the crime affects them a lot of ways. Some of them lose their jobs. Some of them are hurt physically and emotionally. And they don't have any money. And this is not a new concept. Years ago, under the Reagan administration, Congress recognized this problem, this issue about the fact that many victims after the crime and after the trial, they just disappear in quiet lives of desperation. And culture, community doesn't keep up with those people. So during the Reagan administration, Congress decided, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make criminals who are convicted in federal court pay into a fund, and that fund is used to help crime victims. What a great concept. Make criminals pay the rent on the courthouse. Make them literally pay for their crime by putting money into a fund that goes to crime victims. And that's the Victims of Crime Act that passed. And the federal judges, God bless them, they are nailing those criminals, and they are taking a lot of their money away from them and putting in about $2 billion a year into that fund. And today, we have a situation where the fund is over $11 billion. Money criminals pay to help crime victims. But here's the problem. That money isn't going to crime victims. Crime victims only get about $700 million a year out of that fund of $11 billion, $2 billion coming in every year. And then the government gets an 8% cut. That even makes it less. And there's a cap. And government sets the cap on that money. Remember, this is not taxpayer money. It doesn't belong to anybody except to the victims of crime. And that money is used and offset for other purposes. It goes to other programs in commerce, science, and justice, probably good programs. And now with sequestration, we hear that that fund may be completely cut off this year for crime victims because of some squirrely math somebody's using saying sequestration should apply to the crime victims fund. That's nonsense. And meanwhile, throughout the country, victims organizations, shelters, groups like CASA who represent kids in the courtroom when their parents are not doing the right thing by their kids. And many programs are barely keeping the lights on because they don't get enough money from VOCA, even though money is available and it's just sitting there or being offset for other programs. So what needs to happen is this. 1, raise the cap every year. $2 billion's coming in every year, we ought to at least allow the victims to have $1 billion of that, maybe $2 billion of it, because it keeps coming in. And more importantly, what we ought to do is take that money and put it in a lockbox concept. It's a very simple concept, that the criminals pay into the fund, and the fund should go only to crime victims and crime victims programs. It shouldn't go to other programs in the federal government, even if they're good programs, because it was designed by Congress, approved by the administration, to go to those silent, quiet victims who are still today hurting because of crimes that are being committed against them. And it just seems nonsense to me. We have the money available. It's not taxpayer money. We can help victims of crime get their lives back together, and it's not happening because somebody else wants crime victims' money. So let's put this in a lockbox. Mr. Costa from California and I have sponsored legislation to say, look, it's not the government's money, it's victims' money, and it ought to all be spent to help victims and victims programs throughout the country. Groups that are doing a great job to help rescue crime victims because of crimes that have occurred against them in the past. That is justice. And, Mr. Speaker, justice is what we do in this country. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House is in the process this week of dealing with the most important bill that almost no one has paid any attention to. I'm talking about the Farm Bill. It goes far beyond dealing with needs of rural and small-town America. It's going to involve, with all likelihood, given the way the past farm bills have exceeded their budget estimates, it's very likely to be over $1 trillion. The Farm Bill is actually getting better, slowly but surely, but it has a long way to go to get the most value out of this bill for America's farmers and ranchers, for the people who eat, and for protection of the environment. Mr. Speaker, this week I will be offering some amendments that I hope will be made in order that will try and coax more value out of this process. The first and foremost, based on legislation I've introduced, the Balancing Food, Farm, and Environment Act, would strengthen the Environmental Quality Incentives Program to have stricter payments so we're not putting too much money into any one project, and would disallow spending for large factory farms, but provide additional support for farmers who want to transition to production techniques that use fewer pesticides or antibiotics and stretch those conservation dollars further. It would also have an amendment that would reform the Conservation Reserve Program to direct more money to conservation enhancement and continuous conservation reserve subprograms to target the most environmentally sensitive and re-enroll higher priority lands, providing more stability for farmers, better results for the taxpayers, and more flexibility at the state area. Third, and perhaps most important, legislation I'm co-sponsoring along with Mr. Chaffetz would apply reasonable limits for means testing crop insurance. The crop insurance program needs greater scrutiny by Congress. It is an area where the federal government provides huge subsidies to insurance companies to sell and service the policies. It pays most of the indemnities when there are losses, and generous subsidies to make the premiums cheaper for farmers. Today in the New York Times, there were an article that talks about the fraud and waste in the program, that really we haven't zeroed in. There are clear areas of abuse that need more attention. My friend Mr. McGovern had an amendment that said before you slash nutrition, at least have the rate of fraud and abuse down to the same level as food stamps. I think that's a good proposal. But to the amendment that I have introduced with Mr. Chaffetz, it would put a limit of $750,000 beyond which we would no longer subsidize the crop insurance for the large agribusiness. It's not that they couldn't have crop insurance, it's just the taxpayer will not be on the hook. It's important for us to start paying attention to the crop insurance program. As we theoretically get rid of direct payments, although we still are going to have direct payments for cotton, and I have an amendment on that as well, it's important to look at the overall structure of this program. We don't want to be in a situation where actually we're going to end up paying more for crop insurance than the cost of traditional commodity programs proposed by the House and the Senate, and that there are not incentives to be able to use it efficiently and to root out fraud and abuse. I would strongly urge my colleagues to look at amendments like I have proposed and others. Look at how the Farm Bill, the most important environmental, nutrition, and economic development for small towns and rural America can be done better. It's past time to have a farm bill that is environmentally sound, that is cost-effective, and targets areas that need the help the most. This ought to be an area where we can follow through on the desire to get more value out of tax dollars while we help more people. I look forward to the debate this week. I hope it is robust, and I do hope that we'll be able to debate the wide range of these issues that would make this farm bill much better. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Minnesota, Ms. McCollum, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this week the House debates the Farm Bill that eliminates SNAP benefits for 38,000 Minnesotans and nearly 2 million Americans. Last week I hosted a listening session with Congressman Ellison on how this would impact our state. We heard from faith leaders, service providers, state and county officials, SNAP recipients young and old. Evelyn, a senior, told us she was terrified she'd lose her SNAP eligibility under the House bill, and I quote from her, "Without the help from SNAP, I wouldn't be able to buy the healthy foods, fresh fruits and vegetables I need to keep my diabetes in check. Without SNAP," she said, "I don't know what I would do." For millions of seniors like Evelyn, SNAP is a lifeline. It ensures that they don't have to choose between medicine or buying food. And for America's children, they should be able to attend school and be able to solidly concentrate on their studies because they had something to eat. I urge my colleagues to reject this immoral cut and to remember the words of Patricia Lahl, Director of St. Paul Councils on Churches. No more hungry neighbors. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Jane Aleti yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York for 5 minutes. Mr. Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to talk about an issue I deeply care about. And that issue is the affordability and ability of students across America to get a college degree. Mr. Speaker, as we face this impending student interest loan cliff on July 1st, I want to share with you and with the American public a personal story. You know, I'm the youngest of 12. I have 8 older sisters, 3 older brothers. And my mother and father made a commitment to each other that each and every one of us would get some sort of college degree or advanced degree. You know, my father passed when I was 2, and there were 6 of us left in our household that my mother had to raise on her own. And I went to college, went to law school, and I watched in her eyes the fulfillment of that promise that her and my dad made to each and every one of us. Now, not all of my siblings went to law school. One got a vocational degree cutting hair, who now works in Arizona. I have the law degree, and there's a whole mix in between. And as we deal with the issue of student loan interest, we need to make sure that we stand for the students, that we stand for the next generation, because a college degree and a higher educational pursuit will arm those young men and women for generations and empower them to control their own destiny in their own hands. So I come today on my side of the aisle and say to my colleagues, thank you for joining us in passing a bill in the House that would avert the interest rate spike that will be coming up on July 1st. And I ask my colleagues to join me and to demand that the Senate take action. As you see, Mr. Speaker, the Senate has failed to pass a piece of legislation in the Senate to avert this fiscal cliff to our students across America. To me, Mr. Speaker, that's just not right. That's just not fair. We need to do better. And what we need to do is to pass a reform out of this body and out of this Congress that takes the student out of this political theater that has become the student loan interest spike every year that we have to deal with. The proposal in the House, to me, makes sense. It's a common-sense, market-based approach that will lower interest rates on 70% of the loans that students receive in going to college and advanced degrees. I ask the Senate, and I ask my colleagues, to continue to join us with pressure on the Senate to say enough is enough. We care about students. Let's address this issue so that they don't see that interest rate spike that is coming down the horizon. And say to the White House, sign this legislation once and for all that removes the students from the political debate that this issue has become. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Wilson, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, as the House begins consideration of H.R. 1797, I rise in solidarity with the women of the world. I rise in outrage at yet another attempt to control our bodies and make choices for us instead of allowing a woman to make their own choice with their doctors and their families. First of all, it's the woman's body, not yours. She alone bears the burden, the pain, and joy that it brings. Please stop trying to regulate our reproductive organs. They belong to us. To the men who feel so inclined to tell women what to do, I ask, have you ever had a menstrual period? Have you ever felt unbearable pain in every bone of your body during childbirth? Will you be there for a mother when she needs prenatal care, formula, diapers? Will you support Head Start programs? Will you focus on creating good public schools? Will you reform foster care and stop greasing the prison pipeline with unwanted children? There are grandmothers living in trailer parks and public housing, single-handedly raising millions of grandchildren. Where are you when grandmother is trying to feed Jerome, Chiquita, Pedro, Heather, and John? The only time I see you is on the floor of the House trying to take away Grandma's Social Security and attacking her Medicare and food stamps. Grandma doesn't have a car, so she has no ID so she can vote you out of office. For some reason, you care about a baby right until the minute it is born into the world, and then you disappear and desert the children you claim to protect and love. Shame on you. Stop the cradle to grave neglect and abuse. Stop the shenanigans and bring to the floor bills that will create jobs, jobs, jobs for the American people. And mind your own business and regulate your own body. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's great to come down on the floor to just take a few minutes to talk about energy policy in this country. The Republicans on the side and many of my friends across the aisle, we do believe and speak about an all-the-above energy strategy. And that, it means all the above. First, and the Speaker would not be surprised that I would come down and talk about nuclear power and how that in the whole line of the processing of the fuel to the electricity production, they're good-paying jobs. There are challenges we have to overcome, which is the high-level nuclear waste, the spent nuclear fuel, and the location for that, because that is a cost burden on the industry until we get that solved, as we promised. Another major important energy production for us is coal. I come from Southern Illinois, a lot of coal mines there, and electricity generated by coal. It is a low-cost fuel, and it provides great jobs for our coal miners. It also is high-paying jobs in rural America for the power plants in the location. The governor of the state of Illinois just signed what they're claiming is to be the most intense and precise fracking bill in the nation, which will allow us to look for, locate, recover through the fracking process, we believe, crude oil to the extent of which we haven't seen since World War II, which also will ease our reliance on imported crude oil. Also, part of this debate is the renewable portfolio debate, and some of that would be wind and solar, but don't forget the agriculture input through the RFS, which would be biodiesel, whether that's by soybeans or by reformulated cooking oil or beef tallow, or the ethanol debate, whether that is a cellulosic, the future generation of ethanol production, or the corn-based ethanol production as it is. It's at a great time in the energy debate in this country because we're now at a point where we are demanding less and producing more, which would allow us then to at least stabilize and hopefully lower our prices while we then continue to become now an energy exporter. We're in a hearing today in the Energy and Power Subcommittee that talks about exporting coal, exporting liquefied natural gas. That will be revenue and jobs to this great country. For many of us, we haven't seen times like this in a long time, and it's up for us in the public policy arena to make sure that we don't mess it up by increasing regulatory demands and other hurdles which will inhibit the entrepreneurs and the risk takers from taking advantage of this great opportunity. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time, and I thank you.
The gentleman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until approximately 12 noon.
The House wraps up morning hour, returning at noon Eastern for legislative work. On their agenda today, lawmakers will debate and vote on a bill sponsored by Arizona Republican Trent Franks that would ban abortions after 20 weeks. The House also begins work on the Farm Bill, which sets out agriculture and nutrition programs and policy for the next 5 years. Live coverage of the House here on C-SPAN when they return at noon. On C-SPAN 2, the U.S. Senate continues work on the immigration bill, legislation creating a path to citizenship for most of the 11 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S., and also tightening border security. Votes on a number of amendments about 3 o'clock this afternoon. Majority Leader Harry Reid saying last week that he'd like to finish the bill by the July 4th recess. Again, that's on C-SPAN 2, live now. And over on C-SPAN 3 today, live now.